chapter 5. We're going to look at just one verse. Look at chapter 5, verse 12. And as you're looking at that, realizing I was looking back at some records, and this month is 25 years since the first time that I put on this tan shirt. Of course, now I have one. It doesn't fit me anymore, but it had little patches on it, and I raised my right arm, and I for the first time, repeated these words, and those words were, "On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country, and to obey the Scout law, to help other people at all times, and to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight." Now, for those of you who don't know what that is actually the Boy Scout oath. Okay? Now, the Cub Scout oath, which I had done before, was a little bit shorter, and I don't actually remember that one. And I wasn't going to, make myself a little cheat sheet for it. That didn't seem to fit well when we want to talk about integrity and keeping our word. Cheat sheets and keeping your word don't go well together. But that was a promise that we made. But I want you to notice something about it. Nowhere in the wording to that you actually say, "I promise." In fact, when you look back either at items like that, or in this I did write up so that I would remember, this is the closing on the Declaration of Independence. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Throughout the entire Declaration of Independence, nowhere do you find that they use the words "we promise" or "we swear." They simply said, "We pledge, we will do this." When you take the Boy Scout oath, even though it's called an oath, you don't say, "I promise that I will do this." You simply state, "This I will do." And in fact, when you look at some of the great things across history, people simply gave their word and kept it. And I would tell you that as we look at this verse in James today, that I think that one of our problems that we have become, that has really come upon us as a country, is that we've become people that have to make promises. Some of you probably could cite and remember times in which you did large business deals, and they may not be large compared to the world of finance today, but they were big for you, simply by looking somebody else in the eye and shaking a hand and saying, "This is what we'll do." In fact, there was a time, and this causes lawyers no end of grief to this day, where a great many business arrangements were made like that, and they were considered binding. You simply looked a person in the eye and said, "Yes, we'll do this." You shook hands and you went on. And now you wouldn't think of doing that. You wouldn't consider swapping 500 acres of land on a handshake and a smile. You wouldn't trust the person that did it. You wouldn't want to leave it at that. But that's the way that we used to do things. Now, with that in mind, I'd like you to look at James chapter 5, verse 12. And James writes to the church, he says, "But above all, my brethren, do not swear, either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath, but your yes is to be yes and your no, no, so that you may not fall under judgment." James says, don't swear. Now in modern English, we have words we call swear words, and it's easy to look at this and say, James says don't swear. Don't use those bad words that show up in some of those movies that we go and see. But that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about swearing an oath, making promises. He's echoing actually the words of his half-brother. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus said, "You shouldn't swear by this, you shouldn't swear by that. Simply let your yes be yes and your no be no." And what I want to talk to you today about is that rather than promises or swearing or oath-taking, we need to stop and think about what that says about our character. And why that James would give this as an instruction to the church and warn that by swearing and taking oaths, we put ourselves under judgment. First of all, Jesus says that we believe Scripture is inspired, and so therefore we think that God is speaking through James as much as He spoke through Jesus. But Jesus said this is the way that we ought to be. And in fact, if you look in the Bible, you actually do not find, get ready for this because some of you are going to panic when I say this, God never makes a promise in the Bible. Now some of you just dropped your teeth. Pick them up and put them back in. God never makes a promise in the Bible. Nowhere, when you look throughout the entire Old Testament and New Testament, do you see God say, I promise I will do this. Never. You find God says, I will do this. And every time He does, He follows through. Every time and place where God says, I will do this, God does it. When you look at it in the original languages in which it's written, in Hebrew and in Greek. Now you take your English Bible, and you'll find places where it says, God did this just as He promised. But if you have, for example, a New American Standard Bible, like I have, there'll be a little number 1 or number 2 or something that points you to the footnote, and you'll see it says down there, literally, as God spoke. We in English look back and see that when God says, I will do this, it matches with our idea of what a promise is, because it's God saying what He intends to do in the future. But God never actually uses the phrase, I promise, anything. God says He will. And He follows through. God doesn't have to take an extra oath or make an extra promise to say, oh, well, you can really depend on me this time. Because that's really what we're saying when we say, I promise. We say, well, this is what, well, I'm going to do this. Oh, and I promise I'm going to do that. So we can't believe you if you don't say that you promise? I mean, let's stop and think about this. So often promises, we end up with this idea that, well, promises get broken. That ought not be. But it shouldn't hurt us any more that a promise was broken than that somebody's own word was broken. It shouldn't bother us more that we broke a promise than that we broke our own commitment. We said, I will do this. Because that's the way God is. When He says He will, He follows through and He delivers. And we as God's people are called to echo the character of God. We're supposed to be like Jesus. And Jesus never once promised to go to the cross and die for our sins. He just said He would, and He did. And yet we have to make, I promise I'll be home for lunch. When did we get that far? On top of that, when we promise, and James brings this up about swearing by heaven and by earth, and Jesus brings this point up as well, we swear by things that we can't control. I'd swear on a stack of Bibles that what I'm telling you is the truth. Well, you know what? If somebody's a liar, it really doesn't matter what size stack of Bibles they swear on. Stop and think about it. If you consider the average politician, and we won't go too far with this, but they swear on a Bible when they go into office that they're there to serve other people. Now, pick the first 10 politicians that come to mind. How many of them do you think swearing on a Bible made one bit of difference as far as their character in office? The ones that you could trust, you wouldn't have had to swear in, and the ones that you can't trust, swearing them in didn't make a difference anyway, did it? I'm not asking you to name names, pick parties. Because I can give you examples on both sides of whatever aisle you would like. And that's supposed to be our character, is that we are in control of our own behavior. We swear by the earth. Oh, I swear I'll do this. And it was in there. It was common in those days that you would swear by the earth. As long as the earth endures, I will do this. You hear this in country love songs. As long as the rivers run, I will keep loving you. Oh, it's a beautiful song and it's a lovely sentiment. Can you do anything to make the river stop or go? I'm reminded of the Statler Brothers song that I grew up with. Until the lights go on at Wrigley Field, I'll keep loving you. And then they didn't know what to do when they put up lights at Wrigley Field and played baseball in the dark. Or not in the dark anymore. That was a love song that made a promise by something that you couldn't control. When we try to tie our promises to other things outside of ourselves, we're promising based on things we can't control anyway. I swear, as long as the river runs, I won't ever, I'll always be faithful to this. I'll always be faithful to you. And then somebody comes along behind you, dams up the river, build a hydroelectric power generating plant, a recreational lake, and the river's gone. What do you do then? Then you're in trouble. Well, until this happens, as long as the stars shine in the sky, you do understand that some of those stars are millions of light years away, and you're seeing light that's been traveling since perhaps the time of Noah. That star may have burned out by now. I wouldn't make a promise based on a star if I were you. You don't know what's going on, and yet we make those promises. And instead, the character of God that we're supposed to be like as God's people is somebody who says, this is what I will do. And you can depend on that. Now, James does go on and talk about how we ought not be arrogant and assume that things are going to completely go according to our plan. Lord willing, this is the plan. But folks, we all know things happen outside of our control. I'll give you an example because she's not here, but Susan Moss really planned on being someplace else Wednesday night other than recovering from having gallbladder surgery. And I can assure you, she did not get up Wednesday morning planning to go and be in the hospital that day. But we understand those types of things. Certain parts of life are completely outside of our control. Other things are within our control. And those are the things that we ought to be honorable and keep our word with. Be honest with people about the way that we are. Be honest and straightforward. And I want you to think about a few areas of life. How would being honest people, being people whose character was simply that we kept our word, would affect us. Think about how that would affect your family, your friendships. Those of you that aren't married, I don't know that we've got too many not marrieds in here, but those of you that aren't married, how it would affect you if you're dating and those kinds of relationships. See, I was aiming for our teenagers that are not here today, so I'd like to get them later. Because our almost teenagers aren't going to date for 30 years, so it doesn't matter. But dating, your marriage, your work, about church. Think about how being people of integrity would affect politics if we could actually get some into that business. We won't go too far into that one. But stop and think about your family. Your parents, your children, your brothers, your sisters, your cousins, your aunts, your uncles, whatever family that you've got. Because we've all got at least a little bit of family somewhere. Think about how it would be if our families knew that when we said something, we would deliver on it. That if we said this is where we would be, that we would be there. If we said this is what you can count on from us, that they could count on. And if we didn't have to go around trying to make promises. Well, I promise I'll make the birthday party this year. Well, I promise I'll remember this year. Well, I swear this year I'm going to do it. Parents, what if your children could simply rely on you to be where you said you would be, when you said you would be there? Instead of sitting there thinking, well, Daddy didn't keep his promises this time around. Because if they thought they could depend on you, then they would also be able to understand in those times when you say, you know what, this is a time I can't make it. I'll do my best, but I can't guarantee it every time. We had those moments when I was growing up. Dad was in the Air Force. He was an air crew member. There were times that the Air Force said, well, you're going to go and all you got to do is fly this stuff over here and then fly back. I still have a paranoia about flying that some of y'all will never have, because I know all the times that Dad flew someplace, the plane broke, and it took an extra week to get back. Because they'd be waiting on parts. But you grow up knowing, Dad does his best. Not Dad makes promises and doesn't keep them. Parents, what if we just were that way with our children? This is what we said. This is what we do. Children, Those of you who are adult children of adult parents, what if your parents could depend on you to keep your words you said you would do? You told Mom you'd come by the house and help her change the light bulbs she can't reach. What if you just did it? You told Dad that you'd be there to help with this. What if you just did it? Didn't make them hold out for you to make a promise and then keep it. Not adult children of parents. You said you would clean your room. Do it. And that's not just aimed at 3 of you. That's aimed at all of you. You said you would do it. Do it. Think about how that would change our family. Instead of having, well, I wonder if I can believe Doug when he says that he'd do this time. How would that revolutionize our marriages? If instead of Ann wondering if I was going to keep my promise this time, if I'm going to keep my word this time, if I said I'm going to come home and cook lunch today, if she knew she could count on the fact that when I walked in the door, I'm going to the kitchen to cook lunch. If she could plan her day around the fact that I said I would do. What if our marriages were simply based on trust because we chose to be trustworthy people? If our marriages were based on the fact that we could be depended on because we have given our word in front of God and witnesses that we would be a certain type of people, and that could be counted on. And I would remind you that you started your marriage by taking a vow not to the other person, but you take a vow to God about how you're going to treat the other person. That's who your wedding vow was addressed to, by the way. You didn't make a promise to your spouse. You made a promise to God. You gave your word to God about how you would treat your spouse. Your marriage isn't based on your relationship to each other. It's based on your commitment to God. So as long as He endures and your marriage is committed to Him, that's what holds you together. I don't think my wife puts up with me because, I'm worth putting up with. No. But it's because of what God has done. Your friendships. So many friendships fall apart because what do? We don't honor what we say we would do for each other. Our friends expect us to keep their confidences when they say, would you please not tell anybody about this? I'm struggling with this, or I have this problem, or I opened this letter from the IRS today and they want $9 million. Which I've never opened one that said that, but it might as well have said that, although we did resolve that one. But our friends expect us to keep our confidences and not go blabbing to everybody. Say, I was just sharing a prayer request. No. You were breaking the confidence. You were gossiping. You can make it holy if you want to, but it's not. Our friendships are based on trust. You say, oh, well, I promised my friends I would be there. I told my friends I would be there. Think about how that would change. Instead of worrying about, I need to call on somebody to pray for me about this, and I would call my friend to pray, but I don't know if I can trust him. I need to call my Sunday school class and ask those ladies to pray for me, but I don't know if I can trust them. They said they wouldn't tell anybody, but can I trust them? See, we've lost that aspect of that character that we're supposed to have of being trustworthy people, and it drives us to be alone. Because we're afraid. Because of what happens to our trust. Think about work. We talked a little bit about that, the idea that there was a time that you walked in, you could walk into a place, you could do business with a handshake, a look in the eye, and go on because you could trust people. You could hire somebody to do a job, and that employee, if you looked at it and said, do this, and they said, I'll do it, that they would do it. Think about how much better it would be if you were that kind of employee at work. That when you went to work, instead of saying, well, let me check and make sure this is actually in my job description, and then you'll have to extract a promise and 3 sealed covenants, and my signature on 14 things that I'll actually do this. Instead, you just looked at your employer and said, I agreed that when I came to work here, I would work for you to do what needed done. As long as it's not immoral, illegal, or unethical, I'll do it. because I gave my word. I told you when I came here I'd work for you. What if you as a boss, some of you have people that work for you? What if you as a boss kept your word? I told you I'd take care of this and this for you as an employee. One of the things that is ripping our economy apart is the number of people who have reached a retirement age and their employers who gave them their word 40 years ago that, hey, once you retire, we would take care of this, this, and this, have all decided to back out of that commitment. One of the things that my father is dealing with is the fact that somewhere around, I'll tell you how old he is, but about 40 years ago, he took a job for an employer who said, if you do this, this will be taken care of for you the rest of your life if you put in your time in retirement. All your medical insurance needs, all of this, and this will be taken care of. And they've changed that. That employer has changed that promise at least 4 times that I know of. To say, no, on second thought, we're not going to do that. No, on second thought, we're not going to do that. No, on second thought, we're not going to do that. And it's not the people he works for now that have done it. Four times they've broken their word and changed it. And that hurts people. In the long run, that hurts, that tears things apart. Because bosses don't do what they committed to do. Employees don't do what they committed to do. If you took a job and you committed that you would work, you committed to show up and work. This was a constant problem I used to have trying to help manage teenagers to work in a fast food restaurant. They're supposed to be working, not text messaging, not Facebooking. Because that's what they were there for. That's what you're there for, is to work. Put in your work. Church. Think about it. There's a movement now in great many churches where when somebody wants to become a church member, they actually put in front of them a signed church membership covenant. You need to sign this so you can be a member here. You want to know why that has gotten to be the case? Because too many people sign up and decide, oh, I want to be a member of the church, and they think that doesn't incur on them any kind of responsibility. Folks, if you're a member of a church, you have a responsibility to that church, even if you're the youngest, newest member of the church, to do whatever you're able to do to further the cause that church is trying to do, which is to share the gospel with the world around them. On top of that, some of those covenants spell out, well, this is what the church will do for you. Folks, what the church will do for you is do the best we can to be a church family, to pray for you, encourage you, strengthen you, and help you grow. What else do we need? Why do we need notarized statements and contracts between church members and churches? It's who we are. Our relationship as a church is based on keeping our word. Hey, this is what we'll do. And you know what the scariest thing is? You know what the main lie told in churches these days? Because I'll tell you, there's a lie that gets told in church and between church people probably every day of the week. I'll pray for you. And it's follow-up. Oh, I've been praying for you. Because we do that to each other. Oh, I'll pray for you. And then we forget. And then when we see somebody, we say, oh, I've been praying for you. Stop lying to each other on that. If you haven't prayed for somebody, now I'm not saying that you've got to pray for 2 hours to be able to make it truthful. But if in all honesty you look at somebody and say, you know, I completely forgot about praying for you, just don't say that. Just leave it unsaid. But don't lie to them and tell them you have been. Better yet, make it true. I've been praying for you. And I can tell you, with the exception of, the 2 kids that I'd never met before today, I've been praying for every one of you. Not as much as I should. Not as much as I'd like, but I have been praying for you. I'm not going to promise you that, but I will tell you that. You can take my word for it or not. That's your decision. But I don't lie to y'all about those things. Be honest with one another. make that statement, because becoming a church member is making a commitment, saying, I will be here to support this church. I will be a part of what we do. Another problem that churches have is between those who would lead and those who follow in the church, and that is that to be a church leader is to commit to be a servant of the church. If you're serving the church, if you put on something that says, I will do this, you've given your word to do it. Follow through with it. Do it. Church members, one of the things that we say when we ask somebody, for example, if somebody is a deacon, we've said, hey, we're going to ask this person to help us. And then we sit around and we go home and we have a problem, but we don't ever let our deacons or our pastor know. And then we fuss because they didn't help. We didn't keep our word to them, and that was we told them we'd let them serve. If you go through a trial and a struggle as a church member, and you never let anybody at church know about it, you've broken your word to the people at church who said they'd be there to serve you and help you. You've never thought about it that way before, have you? But it's the truth. When you came and became a part of a church, you said that you would share your strengths and your struggles. Share them both. When you come to church in the morning, and when you come and gather in your Sunday school class, you come, honor your word. It says, I'm here to study the Word of God and be ready for it. Be as awake as you can be. Be as much a part of the things going on as you can be. Because that's one of the things that we desperately need. Is to become people who honor our word and keep our commitments. Not people who make more and more promises. Not people who, I swear, put my left hand on the Bible, I'll raise my right arm. Now there are times that you have to do that. If you get called for jury duty next week, you're going to have to swear because the court doesn't believe anybody. But they ought to be able to believe you. And you shouldn't be any more truthful because you've been sworn in as a witness or sworn in as a juror. Hopefully none of you are sworn in as a defendant. Although I don't know, I saw some pictures of some police activity last night, so I'm not sure what, I hadn't heard any follow-up on that. But hopefully, sworn in as those kinds of things, but you ought to be just as truthful and you've been sworn to something as you are if you haven't been. There should be no difference in your mind as to what you're going to say. We ought to be people of our word. Because, as we said at the beginning, this echoes the character of God. For example, God said this, whosoever calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. Salvation is not a promise of God, it's a fact that He has stated. He has said. He doesn't say, I promise, I hope. He says, I will. Whosoever calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. That's one of the things that we can count on beyond everything else going wrong. God doesn't say as long as the rivers run, as long as the oceans are wet. He doesn't even say as long as the sun is hot. He simply says, I will. Whosoever calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. And so one of the first questions you need to ask yourself is, have I called upon His name? Because there's another thing that He has said is certain, and that is, it is appointed unto man once to die, and after that the judgment. And that judgment is where God will weigh what we have done against the standard of His holiness and His perfection. And either we'll see how sinful and wretched we are and face the consequences of it, or He'll look at us and see that we have called upon Jesus and died in our place. He rose again on the third day because He said, I will rise up. And we can point to Him and say, He's our Savior. One of the two will deal with our eternity at that judgment that is coming. And so where are you today? Do you need to ask God to follow through with what He has said He will do and save you? Do you need to see a little bit more about what that means in Scripture? We have time for that. Do you need to recommit yourself, not make a fresh promise to God, but simply state, I will follow Christ? Do you need to maybe establish that you will commit yourself and be a part of this body as a church member? You need to just commit yourself afresh right where you sit, that you will be a person who honors Christ with your